Jumping into the vol side, realized vol's been pretty stable, still about 30 on Bitcoin, has ticked a bit higher to 65 odd on ETH. Front end vol still under a bit of pressure on Bitcoin, not doing too much, but ETH is grinding higher by a couple of vols. Carry has stayed positive, but not massively in Bitcoin, whereas it's flipped to negative on ETH there. So, being short gamma hasn't really paid that well. And even on Bitcoin, I think shorting gamma at these levels with this inflection point is somewhat dangerous. So you kind of want to be careful of that. The OHLZ charts kind of show, over the last sort of week or so, we breached to the upside. We then reversed breach to the downside, the implied range. And then last couple of days, we've been breaching to the downside again. So Bitcoin's not really respecting its ranges. And then ETH, funnily enough, is probably respecting its ranges a bit more, but it is on a much higher vol, right? The implied vol is double. So the implied range is also double that, right? So that's what we're seeing there. Looking at term structures, you can see here we are in this kind of contango curve still, upward sloping, although that's in Bitcoin. If you look at ETH, we do kind of peak out in that 2-3 week range, and then the curve fades back down a little bit into the long part of the curve. Skew's an interesting one. If we look at kind of what the curve's doing in Skew, being pulled down here in both assets into put premium in the front end as the market's obviously correcting off the highs. The Ethereum curve flips back into calls as we go to October. So still, a bit more of a bullish view on the longer term on Ethereum in terms of what Skew's pricing. But interesting, if you look at Bitcoin, we don't get back into a call premium until we go to March next year. So actually, there's quite a lot of put premium now in most of the curve in Bitcoin, right? And that's something to be aware of. And I've always said this long end of the skew being consistently in call premium, I've been using as somewhat of a regime indicator to say that we're in a bullish regime, and this long-term skew is telling us that. I'm now starting to question whether this long-term skew getting pulled down into puts is telling us that the rally in Bitcoin is kind of done for a while, right? So there is a risk of that. We need to watch it. Now, there may be another explanation in that it might be that there's so much money now in Bitcoin as institutions have grown their holdings and their allocations that they're starting to basically do hedging structures, not just in the front end, but they're doing hedging structures in the medium term, like the sort of things that we get in equity markets where people own stocks and want to hedge them. So the demand for protection comes in the longer buckets because it's more institutional capital that's holding the exposure. So there is that potential. So it might be the bull market's not done, but Skew just structurally trades more for puts across the entire curve in an asset that is nice, is well owned, and being invested in good size by enough institutions that know how to use options around their holdings, right? So that is also another scenario. So I'm open-minded to both, but I'm keeping an eye on that. Okay. Flow-wise, the move down definitely did spark some buying flow. August and September puts around the 110k strike on Bitcoin getting lifted. And then there has been some call and call spread selling as longs kind of de-risk ahead of Powell and the fact that the price action hasn't looked very convincing lately. All right, and then looking at the relative value to close out the discussion, ETH BTC did finally pause at this long-term downtrend resistance at 0.039, pulled back about 7% from the high. Front-end vol spread is still very stable at 35, but look, it's dragging up the other maturities. They're all going a bit higher across the curve. So continuing to see a bid for Ethereum vol relative to Bitcoin. Skew-wise, front-end skew normalizing a bit in terms of the spread going closer to neutral, basically showing that Ethereum correcting off the highs has brought in a bit of put demand there and a bit less call demand in the absolute front end of the curve. But the long-term skew is still holding. It's peaking at about December in terms of the skew spread at about 3.5 vols above Bitcoin skew. So definitely the options market saying the year-end view is very much more bullish ETH than it is Bitcoin as things stand, and that kind of makes sense if you think the ETH treasuries are going to continue accumulating for the rest of this year, and a lot of the Bitcoin treasuries have kind of already done that. Then it makes sense that skew is priced the way it is. All right, guys, that is your summary for Crypto Vol this week. I'll catch you guys back here next week. Cheers.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for making it to the end of the video. Remember, this is just a little taster of what we do at Options Insight. To get access to all our research, including my in-depth vol market insights, flows and positioning report, and my portfolio trades, and a whole lot more, you can sign up at options-insight.com. I'll see you soon.